Don't feed Varus. Varus is a ranged champion who deals primarily physical damage while providing utility to his team. He has a moderate movement speed and a quick attack animation. Varus' passive is Living Vengeance. When Varus kills a minion, he gains a small amount of attack speed for a short duration. When Varus kills or receives an assist on a champion, he gains a larger attack speed bonus for a longer duration. This overwrites a minion bonus and cannot be overwritten by the minion bonus. These bonuses do not stack. Varus' Piercing Arrow is a line skill shot that passes through units. This deals high physical damage, but the damage is significantly reduced for every unit it passes through, until it reaches a base minimum damage. This ability can be cast immediately or after a delay. If Varus delays firing this, the range on the ability rapidly increases. While pulling back, Varus moves more slowly and cannot use normal attacks or cast other abilities. If Varus delays firing the arrow, it deals more damage, up to a maximum that is significantly higher than the normal damage of the ability. If Varus delays firing for several seconds, the ability is cancelled. He regains part of the mana cost. The cooldown for Piercing Arrow does not begin until the previous Piercing Arrow has either been fired or cancelled. If Varus delays firing, the ability can be cancelled and put on its full cooldown if he is silenced or otherwise disabled. Varus' Blighted Quiver passively provides bonus magic damage on his normal attacks. Additionally, Varus applies a stack of Blight to opponents with each normal attack, which stacks up to 3 times. If any of his other abilities strike an opponent with Blight stacks, each stack of Blight will deal damage equal to a percentage of the target's maximum health. Blight can be stacked on multiple opponents. Blight stacks last several seconds, and the duration of each stack is refreshed by new attacks. If one of Varus' other spells is blocked by a spell shield, Blight stacks are not consumed and will remain active until they expire or until Varus hits a target with another spell. Varus' Hail of Arrows is a long-range skill shot that deals physical damage in an area. Additionally, the area gains a persistent slowing and healing reduction aura for several seconds. Spell Shield will block the initial damage from the spell, though the slow and healing reduction will still affect the target. Varus' ultimate is Chain of Corruption. When cast, the first enemy champion in a long line is dealt magic damage and briefly immobilized. As soon as Chain of Corruption strikes an enemy champion, any enemy champions around the location where the first player was hit will have visual chains connecting them to that location. After a brief delay, they will also receive damage and be briefly immobilized. However, if the champions who are chained quickly move away from the location of the first affected player, they will not be affected. Note that this is location specific, not related to the champion who is hit. In other words, if a player with high tenacity breaks free early and moves away from their allies, this will not prevent the chains from hitting their allies. Tenacity also has no effect on the speed at which the ability spreads. Chain of Corruption can spread from newly affected champions in the same way as the initial chain, though it will never go back to a previously affected champion. If a champion is immune to crowd control, Chain of Corruption will fail. Spell Shield will break both the initial Chain of Corruption and secondary spreading in most cases. However, in one of our test matches, Spell Shield twice failed to stop the initial application of Chain of Corruption. We were unable to repeat this in later tests, but there may be a bug causing this. Chain of Corruption provides vision on affected targets. For Varus to reach his potential, he must make effective use of his spells. Since 3 of his core abilities are skill shots, and the other ability relies on those 3, you will need to both understand his abilities and be consistent about landing them. Before going further, it needs to be emphasized that Varus is one of a limited number of hard carries with no strong escape mechanisms in fights. For this reason, positioning in smart places, particularly places where you are protected from flanking or have an escape path, is critical. This positioning also means that you should consider targets of opportunity before considering players in the back line during teamfights. While you should take advantage of enemy carries who are out of position and expose themselves to your damage, it's usually better to clear out high priority threats who are in range of you before attempting to move past the front line to damage hard carries. Beyond this, he also generally will not measure up against other skilled AD carries with equal gear, particularly those with dashes or blinks who will avoid some or all of his skill shots. This is due to his lack of a steroid ability, or in other words, an ability that dramatically and persistently increases his damage per second. Fortunately, this is where Chain of Corruption comes into play. While the ultimate isn't too strong in terms of changing the outcome of 1v1 fights, the root makes it far more likely that early and mid-game team ganks will be successful. Along with this, Varus has excellent farming potential, not just from his passive allowing for easy last hits, but also his ability to snipe out minions he can't safely get near with Piercing Arrow. Provided he has the mana, a combination of Piercing Arrow and Hail of Arrows can quickly clear out full minion waves, or at the very least, leave them low enough that he can quickly last hit the remaining minions. It is critical for Varus to make use of both his farming potential and team gank potential in order to stay a step ahead of the opposing team's AD carry. This will allow him to not only offer his utility to his team, but also provide the full effectiveness of other AD carries. Because of the importance of positioning, his gold income has a direct impact on his ability to pump out damage on heavier fighters, so his team can more quickly shut down enemy carries. At champion selection, the best complements to Varus are champions with hard crowd controls, particularly crowd controls that are not skill shots. This is largely because Varus can follow these up with Chains of Corruption to dramatically increase the length of time where a player cannot move from a position. Additionally, champions who can peel enemies off Varus or otherwise buy him time to live are ideal. While this is true for all teams with a hard-ranged AD carry, it is important to understand that Varus may simply be zoned out of a fight by bulky champions with gap closers or crowd controls if teammates do not assist. Let's get into the abilities a little bit, starting with his Blighted Quiver since that affects how he uses his other abilities. The passive component of Blighted Quiver is fantastic for last-hitting minions. While it's entirely possible to last hit without taking a point in this, you will last hit better with it, and you should consider taking at least 1 point early. Beyond this, you need to discipline yourself to using abilities after you've got blight stacks on opponents. The burst damage on this is very significant. A master Varus player will be able to identify situations where they can benefit from stacking blight on multiple targets, and alternate skillfully between them to make sure the stacks don't fall off. His Piercing Arrow is a very strong ability, but you need to get used to weaving it in between your normal attacks for extra damage. As a general rule, it's not good to pull it back at any point while champions are still within normal attack range, as you are preventing yourself from using your own normal attacks or spells by doing this. The cooldown on this ability means you may not get an opportunity to use it twice in quick fights. For this reason, consider saving it until you have blight stacks or until an opponent is fleeing. Piercing Arrow loses a lot of damage when it passes through other units. While it won't always be possible to avoid this, it's useful to consider when you're considering when to fire the shot, particularly if new minions are just approaching. Drawing the arrow back often only makes sense when an enemy is fleeing or otherwise won't be in range of you, or you want to utilize the long-range poke, or you want to last hit minions at a distance when you're being zoned. You will need to lead your opponents a little with the shot, but the projectile is very fast and can be hard for an opponent to dodge. You can also use it to clear full minion waves if you combine the drawn back shot with Hail of Arrows. One last thing, when drawn back, Piercing Arrow has a long enough range that you can snipe Dragon from the outer wall, even if he's been pulled into the river. In the early game, you will need to choose how to best approach harassment. For more frequent exchanges between champions, Blighted Quiver can be a stronger ability than Piercing Arrow. Piercing Arrow, on the other hand, excels at early game poke, particularly if your opponents let you get positions to hit them clear of minions. By mid-game, you need to consider when to use Piercing Arrow poke and when you should be using it strictly to proc blight stacks. Hail of Arrows has two great perks to it. The first is that it has a very long range, which means it's usually easy to put in the path of a player who is fleeing and has just left your attack range. The second is the AoE healing reduction. This is a fantastic counter to healing heavy teams, particularly those who also have a lot of melee. Consider waiting on using this ability until enemies have committed to a location, then dropping it on that location. Beyond this, Hail of Arrows is great to leave behind you if you're fleeing from opponents, particularly in bushes or other tight choke points. The damage on Hail of Arrows can be higher than Piercing Arrow if the Piercing Arrow must travel through several enemy units before damaging the intended target. Keep this in mind, particularly if you want to quickly burn Blight stacks but don't want to immediately use Piercing Arrow. On the subject of Blight, if multiple opponents have Blight stacks, using Hail of Arrows can be easier than Piercing Arrow to proc several at a time from a distance. As mentioned earlier, Varus' Chain of Corruption ultimate is very strong for group ganks and kills. It's generally a solid teamfight skill, but it works much better against melee-heavy teams. Chain of Corruption works very well in conjunction with Hail of Arrows against healing-heavy teams. Locking them into the healing reduction for a few seconds while laying down bursts from the team can help net solid kills. Chain of Corruption is a long-range shot, but do make sure that you're close enough that you're going to land the shot even if they move away from you. Missing Chain of Corruption locks out your core utility contribution to many fights. As a rule, try to land Chain of Corruption on targets that are already crowd-controlled and unable to move. At champion selection, the best champions you can choose against Varus will have some sort of blink or dash abilities as well as hard crowd controls. Additionally, champions less reliant on healing mechanics will be less punished by his Hail of Arrows, so consider support champions such as Lulu and Janna. Champions with instant silences are brutal at countering Varus, as it can immediately stop the cast of Piercing Arrow and leave it on its full cooldown, potentially leaving him without an ability to proc Blight stacks. If you're laning against him in the early game, take a champion with high mobility or a spell shield. Most other AD carries can go toe-to-toe with Varus in early fights, provided you dodge at least one skill shot in the process. Try to take this advantage and harass early, but don't do so if you may come out too low to stay near minions. By getting zoned, you open yourself up to Piercing Arrows that aren't hitting minions, meaning they're dealing at or near maximum damage. For this reason, boots and health potions are ideal, as it lets you be more aggressive early and recover from it if the exchange leaves you lower than you need. Watch out for Blight stacks. While these are on you, his next spell will deal a lot of bonus damage. If you are fleeing and significantly beyond his attack range, make very hard 90-degree turns to fake Varus out. Piercing Arrow is a very fast projectile, so you really need Varus to miss it rather than attempt to dodge it once it's been fired. If you are reliant on healing and need to deal with Varus, watch out for his Hail of Arrows AoE and move immediately out of it. Varus can be completely zoned out of a team fight by aggressive fighters, particularly those who can also avoid at least one of his skill shots in the process. If Varus is carrying the opposing team and is a significant threat, look for any opportunity where he is out of position. Take advantage of this immediately by focusing damage on him. Consider having at least one player ready to flank him from an unexpected path during teamfights. Keep in mind that Chain of Corruption will immobilize you, but it won't prevent you from attacking or casting abilities. If you can ignore the relatively low damage from the ability and don't need to move, you may not need to worry about avoiding chains. Varus punishes melee-heavy teams and many AoE team comps. As with many other champions, watch out before you engage in tight areas such as jungle choke points. Thanks for watching this Don't Feed. Be sure to subscribe with the button on the upper right. Check out my previous movie in this series, Don't Feed Gragas, by clicking the movie thumbnail on the right. I've written a book on League of Legends called Learn the League. If you love these movies, I strongly recommend checking out the book at learntheleague.com. I stream League of Legends Monday through Friday here on YouTube at about 3 p.m. Pacific Time. Make sure you like me on my Facebook page and follow me on Twitter for updates. As always, check the movie information box below for general thoughts and series updates, and let your friends know about this series to help promote it in the League of Legends community. Also, make a post on the official League of Legends forum thread linked below if you really enjoy the series.